Nick Aldis could not finish the sentence. The Smackdown General Manager, a man whose career in professional wrestling spans decades of experience in the most demanding and most emotionally volatile environment the entertainment industry contains, a man who has stood in rings and on stages in front of audiences ranging from dozens to dozens of thousands and delivered whatever the moment required with the composure and the presence that his extraordinary background in this business provides, stood on that SmackDown stage last night and could not finish the sentence that confirmed what the professional wrestling world had been desperately hoping would not need to be confirmed. Paul Heyman has passed away. Those 4 words, the 4 most devastating words that anyone has spoken on a WWE stage in the modern era of this company, came out of Nick Aldis, mouth broken and incomplete and surrounded by the specific, audible grief of a man whose professional armor was completely and comprehensively insufficient to the weight of what he was being asked to say in public in front of cameras rolling to millions of homes simultaneously. The SmackDown audience that gathered in that arena believing they were attending a professional wrestling broadcast, believing they were going to witness the next chapter of the extraordinary 2026 narratives that have consumed this community's attention and passion and emotional investment throughout one of the most remarkable years in WWE history. That audience instead witnessed something that no production plan and no creative direction and no amount of professional broadcasting experience can prepare anyone to witness or to deliver. The public, official, live television confirmation that the most brilliant mind professional wrestling has ever produced is gone. That the voice that made championship reigns legendary and careers transformative in every segment it graced more intelligent and more compelling and more worthy of serious attention than it would have been without it has been permanently silenced by the specific, unforgivable violence that Seth Rollins chose to deliver on Raw and whose consequences no one who loved professional wrestling and no one who loved Paul Heyman was prepared to live in. This is Ring Grumble, and this breakdown is going to be the most important and the most honest and the most complete tribute we have ever produced. Because Paul Heyman deserves nothing less from every corner of the wrestling community that his genius made better. Let us begin with Nick Aldis specifically because his presence as the person tasked with delivering this announcement on SmackDown adds a layer of significance and a layer of heartbreak to an already incomprehensibly devastating situation that deserves to be fully understood and fully honored in this breakdown. Nick Aldis and Paul Heyman share a professional wrestling history that extends far beyond their recent coexistence within WWE's current organizational structure. Aldis' journey through professional wrestling, through NWA, through the independent circuit, through the various promotions and platforms that constitute a career built outside WWE's mainstream before eventually finding its most prominent chapter within it, is a journey that was shaped at various points by the creative philosophy and the industry standards that Paul Heyman established and championed across his own extraordinary career. Every professional wrestler of Nick Aldis' generation was formed in part by what Paul Heyman did to professional wrestling. By the standards he set, by the possibilities he demonstrated, by the refusal to accept mediocrity or audience condescension or creative laziness that characterized everything Paul Heyman touched throughout his career and that raised the expectations of every serious professional wrestling performer who came after him. Nick Aldis standing on that SmackDown stage to announce Paul Heyman's passing was therefore not simply an administrative official performing a difficult institutional duty. It was a member of the professional wrestling community that Paul Heyman shaped personally, shaped professionally, shaped in the fundamental way that visionary figures shape the people who come after them whether or not those people ever had direct personal contact with the vision's source, being asked to publicly articulate the loss of one of the central formative influences on the world he has devoted his life to inhabiting and excelling within. That is an almost unbearable thing to be asked to do. And Nick Aldis attempted it with a courage and a commitment to honoring the weight of the moment that deserves acknowledgement alongside every other element of a SmackDown broadcast that will be remembered as one of the most significant and most emotionally consequential in this program's history. The SmackDown arena before Nick Aldis appeared had a quality that regular television viewers may not have fully registered but that anyone with experience of live professional wrestling events would have recognized immediately as deeply unusual. The pre-show energy, the crowd warm-up, the dark match atmosphere, the collective anticipation of an audience that has gathered for entertainment, was different in a way that communicated something before any official information had been provided. Rumors moved through a live wrestling crowd with extraordinary speed and with a particular emotional texture that the crowd's collective energy then reflects and amplifies before any official confirmation arrives. The SmackDown audience that night had heard things, had seen things on social media, had been sitting with the weight of unconfirmed information whose implications were too enormous to process without the anchoring reality of official confirmation, and had therefore been generating a collective emotional atmosphere of suspended, terrified anticipation that every person in that building could feel pressing against them from the moment they took their seats. Nick Aldis appearing on the SmackDown stage without music, without the standard production infrastructure, without any of the visual language that normally frames official WWE announcements, walking onto that stage with nothing but his own physical presence and the microphone in his hand and the specific expression of a man carrying something too heavy for one person to bear comfortably, confirmed for that arena what the rumor and the social media and the suspended anticipation had been building toward for hours. And the crowd's response to his appearance, before he said a single word, was the specific, weighted, airless silence of people bracing for confirmation of something they already know and are not ready to have made real by the act of official public utterance. And then Nick Aldis began to speak, and the sentence did not reach its end before his voice broke. The broken sentence, the moment of vocal fracture that interrupted Nick Aldis' announcement of Paul Heyman's passing and that every person in that SmackDown arena and watching at home will carry as the specific, permanent sensory memory of this announcement for the rest of their engagement with professional wrestling. That broken sentence is important not as a display of weakness or a failure of professional composure but as the most honest and most human moment that the SmackDown stage has hosted in recent memory. Because professional wrestling is a medium that asks enormous amounts of the people who work within it in terms of emotional management, the sustained performance of feelings that are not genuine in contexts designed to simulate their genuine expression, week after week after week across careers that stretch for decades. The toll that constant emotional performance takes on a person's relationship with their own genuine emotions is one of professional wrestling's least discussed and most significant occupational realities. Nick Aldis' broken sentence on SmackDown last night was the moment that genuine emotion broke through the performance layer completely. Not because Nick Aldis is unprofessional or inadequately prepared for his role but because some things are genuinely too large for the performance layer to contain. Paul Heyman's passing is one of those things. And the professional wrestling community's response to Nick Aldis' broken sentence, the collective recognition that what they were witnessing was real human grief expressing itself in a real human moment rather than scripted drama executing a creative direction, produced the most genuinely connected and most genuinely unified emotional experience this SmackDown audience has shared in an extraordinarily long time. They grieved together, publicly, without the distance that entertainment's framework usually provides. And Paul Heyman, who spent his entire career arguing that professional wrestling deserves to be experienced with full emotional engagement rather than ironic distance, would have understood that moment of collective genuine grief as the most complete tribute his industry could offer. Seth Rollins has not appeared on WWE programming since Raw. The visionary who delivered the attack that initiated the chain of medical events that ended Paul Heyman's life has been absent from the public professional wrestling environment in the days between that Raw and last night's SmackDown announcement. And that absence, Seth Rollins being nowhere in the arena where Nick Aldis confirmed what Seth's choices produced, created a presence more powerful and more disturbing than any physical appearance could have generated. Because Seth's absence from SmackDown last night meant that every moment of Nick Aldis' announcement, every second of the arena's collective grief, every tear and every silence and every broken sentence, all of it happened in a space that Seth Rollins' choices created but that Seth Rollins did not have to physically inhabit and confront. The grief was public and real and present. The person responsible for it was somewhere else. And that specific moral geometry, perpetrator absent while consequence fills the room, is one of the most uncomfortable and most genuinely disturbing realities that professional wrestling has ever had to sit with on a live broadcast. WWE management has a decision to make about Seth Rollins that goes beyond any creative direction or storyline resolution. The professional wrestling community and the WWE universe and every person who loved Paul Heyman and who watched what Seth Rollins did to him on Raw are owed a reckoning with that decision. Not a match, not a stipulation, a genuine, organizational, institutional reckoning with what it means that a member of the WWE roster made choices that produced a colleague's death and what the appropriate response to that reality looks like in an organization that takes its responsibilities to the people within its professional community seriously. The SmackDown roster's presence during Nick Aldis' announcement varied in its visibility but was uniform in its emotional reality. People who had worked alongside Paul Heyman, People who had been shaped by his presence in the industry even without direct personal collaboration. People who disagreed with him and people who adored him and people whose feelings about Paul Heyman were as complicated as every significant relationship in a high-pressure professional environment inevitably becomes over time. All of them present, all of them grieving, all of them navigating the specific professional challenge of continuing to exist within a working environment that has just lost one of its most significant and most definitionally important figures while the cameras continue to roll and the organizational responsibilities continue to demand fulfillment. The SmackDown broadcast that followed Nick Aldis' announcement was the most difficult professional wrestling television that anyone in that building has ever had to produce. Matches happened. Segments were executed. The organizational machinery of a live WWE broadcast continued functioning because it must. Because the alternative, stopping entirely, would not have honored Paul Heyman any more completely and would have created practical consequences that serve nobody. But everything that happened on SmackDown after Nick Aldis' announcement happened in the specific, permanent shadow of what that announcement confirmed. And every superstar who performed on that SmackDown did so carrying the weight of Paul Heyman's absence in ways that will take months and perhaps years to fully integrate into their understanding of what their professional world is and what it means without him in it. Paul Heyman's legacy on SmackDown specifically deserves acknowledgement in this breakdown because SmackDown was a stage that Paul Heyman's presence graced in ways that the show's history will permanently reflect. The Bloodline era, the most significant and most creatively ambitious storyline that SmackDown has hosted in the modern era of WWE's brand split, was built in enormous and essential part on Paul Heyman's contributions as both Roman Reigns' on-screen special counsel and as an off-screen creative intelligence whose understanding of long-form storytelling and character development and audience psychology made the narrative more sophisticated and more emotionally resonant than it would have been without him. When future generations of professional wrestling fans and historians look back at SmackDown's greatest era, Paul Heyman's name will be woven into every chapter of that assessment. Not as a footnote, as a foundational contribution without which the story that produced some of the most compelling professional wrestling television of the modern era simply does not exist in the form that made it genuinely great. Nick Aldis delivering Paul Heyman's passing announcement on the SmackDown stage was therefore not simply an administrative official confirming a tragic event on a convenient platform. It was SmackDown itself, the show that Paul Heyman helped make great, officially acknowledging the loss of one of its greatest contributors in the most public and most permanent way available to it. A broken sentence on a stage that Paul Heyman helped build. A fitting, if heartbreaking, tribute. I need every single one of you in those comments right now sharing your most personal Paul Heyman memory, the specific moment, the specific promo, the specific creative contribution that made you understand what professional wrestling could be when it was operating at the absolute highest level of its ambitions. This community honors its greatest together. And Paul Heyman was the greatest this industry produced in his particular and completely irreplaceable lane. Drop your tribute in those comments right now. Share this video everywhere, with every wrestling fan you know, with every person who ever sat in an arena or in front of a television and felt the specific electricity of Paul Heyman doing what only Paul Heyman could do. His legacy deserves to reach every one of them. Like this video. Subscribe to Ring Grumble, because honoring the giants of this industry with the full depth of their contribution is what this community exists to do. Ring Grumble. When SmackDown loses its greatest contributor, we make sure the world understands the full magnitude of what was lost. Always. Thank you Paul Heyman, for every single word.